Good morning, class. We are beginning today with the election of 1824, and this starts the new material for test number 3. For today's lecture, the first part here, the question that I want you to answer for me as you're listening, that will be for your attendance for today, and today is the 21st of April. The question that you will answer is, do you think John Quincy Adams entered into a corrupt bargain in the 1824 election, and why? So I want you to write me just 2-3 sentences. Do you think John Quincy Adams entered into a corrupt bargain in 1824, and why? And we begin. The election of 1824. The woods was full of presidential timber in 1824. 4 candidates towered above the others. Andrew Jackson of Tennessee was the old hero of New Orleans. Henry Clay of Kentucky was known as Harry of the West. He also had the nickname of the Great Compromiser. William H. Crawford of Georgia, able though ailing, and John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts. He was highly intelligent, experienced, and aloof. Adams ran with vice presidential candidate John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Here you have a northerner, Adams of Massachusetts, running with a vice presidential candidate, a southerner from South Carolina. And I have some campaign banners here. Here we have, first one, Henry Clay, Harry of the West, Justice to Harry of the West, Grand National Whig. He will later run under the Whig Party. Henry Clay. Oh, this one is just too cute. John Quincy Adams for President of the United States, 1824. Like John Adams, but Quincier. Oh, too cute, too cute, too cute. And here, these are souvenir coins that would have been struck, not currency coins, just campaign souvenirs. General Andrew Jackson, the nation's good. General Andrew Jackson, hero of New Orleans. And here we have a campaign cartoon. And here you have the candidates who have tossed their hat into the ring. And here you have the presidential ring. And our 2 Westerners, Jackson of Tennessee and Clay of Kentucky. And here you have John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts, the northerner, and Crawford, the southerner. And Adams's vice presidential candidate is John C. Calhoun, who is a southerner. Jackson, the war hero, clearly had the strongest personal appeal, especially in the West, but he had failed to win the electoral majority. In such a deadlock, the House of Representatives, as directed by the 12th Amendment, must choose amongst the top three candidates. What a mismatch we had in this campaign. Here, Jackson has the highest of the four candidates. Popular vote, 43%. Electoral vote, the largest, 38%. But he does not have a majority. You have to have 50 point something. You have to have over 50%. And he does not have that. Here we have the state of New York going four ways. A vote for every one of the four candidates. Maryland here goes three ways. Delaware goes two ways. Illinois, two ways. Louisiana, two ways. John Adams comes in second. Crawford, while having less of the popular vote, has more of the electoral vote. The 12th Amendment has been passed and says that if no one has a majority of the electoral vote, it is decided by the House. The House will now vote amongst the top three candidates. And so Clay is taken out. He will not be one of the choices because he is not in the top three electorally. He has 37. Yet, he still presided over the very chamber that would pick the winner. He enjoyed all the influence of a popular Speaker of the House. He was in the position to throw the election to the candidate of his choice, since the House would choose, and who is head of the House? The Speaker of the House, and he is a very popular Speaker of the House. If he gets together with the House members and says, hey, this is my choice, I would like you to vote this direction, he has a lot of clout he can swing. Clay reached his fateful decision by a process of elimination. Crawford had recently been felled by a paralytic stroke, so he is out of the picture. And Clay hated the military chieftain Jackson, who in turn bitterly resented Clay's public denunciation of his Florida foray back in 1818. Remember back under Monroe's administration, Jackson had been sent down into Florida to solve the problem of the people coming across the border because Florida had been denuded of the military presence because Spain had taken all of its military presence down south because its different colonies were declaring independence. And so the Floridians, Spanish Floridians, were crossing the border and raiding into the United States and then running back down south. And Jackson was sent in to sort of settle the situation. Instead, he just about took over Florida. And the cabinet of Monroe was just horrified. Oh no, we're going to get into war with Spain, and wanted to censor Jackson, all except Adams, who instead said, no, we are going to applaud Jackson, and we are going to make Spain be responsible for their citizens. And Clay had been for censoring Andrew Jackson. And so there was a very bitter feud going on between Jackson and Clay. And so Clay was not going to support Andrew Jackson, and Jackson hated Clay. Yet, the only candidate left was Adams, with whom Clay, a free-living gambler and duelist, had never established cordial personal relations. The two would never have sat down, Clay and Adams, and had a beer together. They just personally were not of the same nature there. But the men had much in common politically. Both were fervent nationalists. Both were advocates of the American system. Shortly before the final balloting in the House, Clay met privately with Adams and assured him of his support. The House of Representatives, meanwhile, met amid tense excitement, with sick members being carried in on stretchers. On the first ballot, thanks largely to Clay's behind-the-scenes influence, Adams was elected president. A few days later, the victor announced that Henry Clay would be the new Secretary of State. The Secretaryship of State was then the prize plum, even more so than today. 3 of the 4 preceding secretaries had reached the presidency by allegedly dangling the secretaryship as a bribe before Clay. Adams, the second choice of the people, apparently defeated the first choice of the people, Andrew Jackson. Masses of angered Jacksonians, most of them common folk, raised the roar of protest against the corrupt bargain. Jackson condemned Clay as the Judas of the West. We are both Westerners, you from Kentucky, me from Tennessee. How dare you have sold out the West to this Northerner, this Massachusettsian? No positive evidence has yet been unearthed to prove that Adams and Clay entered into a formal bargain, corrupt or otherwise. But appearances were so damning as to render denials unconvincing. Now, personally, I feel no deal was entered. Does Clay want to be president? Yes, he was running in this election to be president. He will run unsuccessfully 4 times for the presidency. Lesser men than him will become president, and this will grieve him greatly. Back then, a good stepping stone into the presidency is to be Secretary of State. And Adams gives him that top plum, Secretary of State. Was a corrupt bargain struck? Well, I do not feel so, and in a little bit I will tell you why. And a Puritan misfit in the presidential chair. And here we have Henry Clay. Henry Clay, leading politician through this time period. We even have some stamps here of Henry Clay. Henry Clay, for the next 30 years, will be a dominant politician in U.S. history. Oops. John Quincy Adams was a chip off the old family glacier. He was short, 5'7". He was thick-set. He was billiard bald, and even more frigidly austere than his presidential father, John Adams. The two are very similar in so many ways. Shunning people, he often went for early morning swims, sometimes stark naked, in the Potomac River. Oh, how times have changed. With the press, with the camera, you would never have a president taking a skinny dip in the Potomac River today. When you read his biography on D2L, he actually has a mishap on one occasion, and you will have to see what happened to John Quincy Adams on one of his swims. Essentially, a closeted thinker rather than a politician. He was irritable, sarcastic, and tactless. Is that what you need in a president? No, you need someone who can be conciliatory, someone who can reconcile, someone who can compromise, work out with other opposing factions. No, he is irritable, sarcastic, and tactless. Yet, few men have ever come to the presidency with a more brilliant record in statescraft, especially in foreign affairs. He ranks as one of the most successful secretaries of states under Monroe, yet one of the least successful presidents. Political spoilsmen annoyed Adams, whether through high-mindedness or ineptitude. He resolutely declined to oust official office holders in order to create vacancies for political supporters. He didn't understand how politics worked. When you get elected, particularly in an election like this, where he did not win the popular, you have to grease the palms that helped you get elected. A lot of people are going to be showing up in Washington now saying, hey, I helped get the vote out in Massachusetts. I helped get the vote out in Kentucky. I helped get the vote out in Illinois. And if it hadn't been my rustling the bushes and getting everyone to the polls and making sure that they voted and giving money to the campaign so that all these people could be out there helping to get the vote in and giving speeches at different town centers and whatnot, you wouldn't have been elected in such and such a township and whatnot. And so I therefore expect a government job, at least for a time period, or I really gave huge contributions and I want to be ambassador to Peru or this or that. And to make sure that they help you get elected in the next election, you pass out all kinds of government jobs and positions and things, and then they help you get elected and give to your campaign the next time around. Well, Adams was annoyed by all of these people showing up wanting to be rewarded for helping him receive a job. And so he resolutely declined to oust efficient office holders in order, just a second, the telephone, hang on. Hello? A telemarketer interrupting our lecture. How rude. So he refused to oust or to give jobs to these political supporters. During his entire 4 years in office, he removed only 12 public servants from the federal payrolls. So he said, why should I remove people that are already in these positions that Monroe put into positions? They're doing a perfectly acceptable job. Simply to put in these people that helped me get elected, that's silly. And so in 4 years, he removed only 12 office holders. Such stubbornness caused countless Adams men to throw their hands up in despair. If the president would not reward party workers with political plums, why should they labor to keep him in office? This man does not understand things. In the next election 4 years later, are these people going to help him get elected? Why would they? He would not reward them the first time around. So as good as he is at some things, understanding the workings of politics, he did not understand those aspects. So now you ask me, was John Quincy Adams working a behind-the-scenes deal with Clay? Hey, you swing your influence, you swing your vote to help me get elected, and I will then make you Secretary of State. If he wouldn't even help himself get elected by rewarding people who helped him get elected, I can't imagine him swinging a deal with Henry Clay to help him get elected either. So this whole corrupt bargain, while looks are damning, and you are not going to convince the Jacksonites that what has happened hasn't happened, and they of course are going to say a corrupt bargain has occurred. I just don't see John Quincy Adams having struck such a deal. Well, the Tariff of Abominations of 1828. The tariff issue provided yet another headache for Adams. In 1824, before he left office, President Monroe had boosted the tariff to new heights of about 37%. That's a pretty high tariff, meaning any good coming in from overseas, let's say it cost $1, till you put the tariff on it, the import duty at the wharf, it now costs $1.37. I did say 37% tariff, didn't I? Yes, it now costs $1.37. That's a pretty high tariff. But Northern industry, remember we are setting up industry in the North, labor costs us so much, and so we are looking for even more protection from cheap overseas goods. And so Northern industry wants an excuse me, an even higher tariff, a protective tariff. In 1828, near the end of his administration, they raised the tariff to 45%. Hotheads in the South promptly brand it the Black Tariff, or the Tariff of Abominations. In South Carolina, that is the South, the flags were lowered to half-mast. So they're saying with the passing of this tariff of 45%, South Carolina's economy is dying. Raise the flags to half-mast. Usually some national catastrophe has happened. A president has died. Something horrible has happened. Well, South Carolina's economy has died. Flags at half-mast. Why did the South, especially South Carolina, react so angrily against the tariff? Well, the Old South, that is the seaboard here, right here along the coastline, the Old South that had been settled first was now the least flourishing of all the sections of the country. This is where cotton had first started to be grown. Meanwhile, up here in the Northeast, industry is now booming. Yes, first everything was shipping. Now industry has really taken foot and is doing well. Manufacturing is going. The West out here is prospering. We don't have problems with being able to get goods out the port of New Orleans. So as much as you can grow out here in the West, you can get it transported down the Mississippi and out. And the Southwest is expanding into new virgin cotton territory. So now you've got Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. This is the deep South, the lower South. This is where a slave least wanted to go. But this is new territory. And they are getting huge bumper crops coming in now in this new territory. So the old South, the seaboard, is the only part of the country that is really suffering. They were overcropped. The old South was petering out. The price of cotton was falling sharply. Supply and demand, with so much new cotton being grown in the lower New South. With supply and demand, more is being grown, prices are going to drop. Meanwhile, their soil is petering out. They are getting less and less bushels of cotton per acre. They are just growing more and more. And so it is becoming almost hardly worth growing cotton here in the old South. John Randolph, a Virginian, grimly quipped that masters would soon cease to advertise for their fugitive slaves, and instead slaves would advertise for their fugitive masters. So the Old South was seeking a scapegoat, and the tariff proved to be a convenient and plausible one. Let me get into the legume issue and nitrogen fixing nodules and the cartoons on the tariff of 1828 in just a minute, but we have taken about 20 minutes now, and I am going to stop here at this point and give you a break, and we will pick up in just a moment.